Humor me. What's your tactic if your relationship is on the rocks? You're suspicious that things aren't going well. Do you confront your partner about this? Do you have an open dialogue? Or do you do what occurs in today's story? A wonderful roller coaster of stupidity! I don't need to hype it up. The title says it all. Today I fricked up by accidentally setting up my ex to become a cheating homewrecker. Also, herpes. Can't forget the good old herpes. So for some pre-context, my ex, now a 30-year-old female, whom we'll call Sam, and I, a now 33 male, met on Tinder in early 2018. Neither of us had ever been in a serious relationship, but our immediate, absolutely electric chemistry turned a one-off hookup into casual dating, which turned into a long-term relationship with discussion of marriage, children, and all that jazz. And for about a year and a half of that relationship, it was absolutely amazing. We had our ups and downs like all couples, but overall, it was an incredible relationship, and we were both deeply in love. However, after that 1.5-year mark, things started to trend downward. For a brief backstory, I had my heart broken by the girl I lost my V-card to when I was 20, which loaded me up with tons of baggage, including intimacy, adequacy, commitment, and trust issues. As a coping mechanism, I spent the next 9 years as a man whore with lots of intimate character defects, repulsed by the idea of a committed relationship, and would regularly brag about how I was unconquered and incapable of love. This was intoxicating to her in the beginning, and the more I pushed her away, the more she clawed her way back to me, begging me to trust her, love her, and open up to her. And eventually, against all my instincts, I let her destroy my walls and defenses, fell in love, allowed myself to become vulnerable with her, and brought her into my life more. However, the more I did this, the more she lost interest in me, despite our plans for the future. It started with her losing interest in intimacy when she previously had an extremely large libido with a generally high one and an open mind to try all sorts of kinks, then manifested in her general attitude toward me and continued from there. Her withdrawal picked up the pace when I got both her and her ride-or-die roommate, whom we'll call Sarah, jobs at the place I worked. Impossibly stupid of me, yes, but I wanted to help her to escape a job she hated and begin a career she could be fulfilled by. And we had both agreed to marriage and kids at that point, so I thought the risk was minimal. So already we're seeing some red flags show up that are understandable for what could be potentially happening next, though I'm seeing two wrongs here on both sides. Now, this might just be confirmation bias and anecdotal, but I personally do know of that experience where you get with someone and then they suddenly lose interest because they've got you now. You're essentially dating Heath Ledger's Joker. Got the car, she doesn't know what to do when she grabs it. While he could also just be projecting this onto her simply because she's in a comfortable space now. How do you know she was actually genuinely all crazy for you versus just really desperately trying to prove to you that she's keen on you? Like, you're both doing each other dirty. And not in the fun way. And you've been like, oh wait, so we're not gonna keep doing these things? But I liked the pencils up my bum. But as we read on, it does come to sense that maybe this is a case of, yeah, she's Heath Ledger's Joker. She thought she wanted these things with you, but now she's actually got the chance to have these things with someone. It's like, oh, wait, maybe I want to experience my youth a little bit longer. For the next year, she became increasingly more distant, cold, critical, and even cruel toward me. She took many opportunities to remind me of my flaws, how I needed to change, how she disagreed, how I did and approached just about everything, how I wasn't the type of guy she had envisioned marrying, how I wasn't manly enough, example into cars, tools, etc. How my earning potential wasn't enough to support a family, and how I was basically a man-child. Every time I brought up something about her that might need to change, she would say, "That's just how I am." This sent my mental health into an absolute tailspin. I had always dealt with low-key anxiety, depression, and previously undiagnosed bipolar disorder, but it had been relatively minor for years, and I was extremely functioning. However, in 2020, exacerbated by the global pandemic and other troubles, on top of the withdrawal of the love of my life, my mental health frayed faster and faster. This made me more clingy, needy, and emotionally dependent, which turned her off more, reasonably so, and created a vicious cycle. And I'm the kind of person who needs to talk about and process feelings in a relationship relationship. She is the kind of person who wants to ignore, deflect, suppress, and forget. Whenever I would tell her how she was making me feel as sincerely as possible, just shrug and say, "I'm sorry you're feeling like that. I don't mean to. I don't know what else to say." And when I would get deeply hurt and emotional, feeling unloved and unwanted, she would tell me it was hard to love me in that state. She would tell me it was hard to love me in that state. And effectively, any progress I made at self-improvement, she would dismiss as not being good or fast enough, the implication being that I effectively was the one standing in the way of her ideal life of kids before she got too old. This turned the relationship toxic and definitely emotionally abusive, despite all of the good times we had interspersed throughout this period. And I was certainly not close to blameless. My toxic defense mechanism had always been weaponizing my own hurt against the people who hurt me, and I became very good at it, lashing out in increasing intervals. And in that time, I definitely deliberately hurt her on plenty of occasions just to maintain some warped sense of fairness in the relationship. This was all made even worse by my coping through alcohol, which turned into alcoholism at some point during the downward spiral. You know what I feel like we're in right now? I feel like we're in Jamie Oliver or Gordon Ramsay's kitchen, except instead of actual food, we're adding spices of just insecurities, depression, alcohol addiction, projection, just everything. They've just got the whole list. They've just got a whole shelf of emotionally damaging things in a relationship, and they've just they've just pulled the shelf over, just chucked it all on the ground. And that's just the context. That's not the actual meat of the story. This came to a head when I discovered secondhand that during COVID, Sam and Sarah had been planning to use the new freedom they had in their new jobs to move back to their home state halfway across the country, never return full-time. Sam only admitted to it when I confronted her about it, but she swore she still wanted to be with me. Believed her and forgave her deception, trying to make our future together work. I'd later learn that she never stopped planning the move. The next months were made harder when she moved back home with her dad for a few months at the end of 2020. The lease of Sam and Sarah's apartment in my city was up, and they decided to save rent for several months. The plan for me and Sam was to be long distance for a few months, and then she'd return to the area when she had to return to the office in early 2021. This would have been fine in theory, since we had done long-distance relationships for a few months previously. My dissolving mental health with her increasing cruelty sent my depression and subsequent alcoholism into overdrive. In the midst of our separation, we reunited one last time for a Halloween trip with my friends. That was overall an incredibly fun time. However, her vibe was so off, aloof, and disconnected that I knew for sure that she finally had decided that she was going to break up with me. When we kissed goodbye at the end of the trip, I knew deep down that it would be the last time. This sent me into the deepest and darkest depression I had ever experienced over the next few weeks, and I started drinking more regularly and more to blackout than I ever had. In mid-November, I began to experiencing increasingly serious bad thoughts for the first time since college, the climax of which was me sitting in the bathtub with a knife for a few hours while writing 2 notes before deciding to sleep on it. Thank goodness I did. After that night, I was desperate for anything to make me feel better, and in my maddened maelstrom of emotional pain, I concocted a plan that I desperately hoped would make me feel better. If I could just see screenshots of Sam shutting down a flirty guy who lived near her, I could put my trust issues to bed and finally stop feeling so chronically terrible. An egregiously stupid and awful plan, of course, but I was obviously not thinking clearly, and I, of course, should have told her about my depression, my thoughts, and all of that, but I was so terrified that if I did, she'd think of me as less of a man than she already did, and she had previously voiced a low opinion of people struggling with mental health issues. So I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I went online and put out a request for a guy who lived near her hometown to test my girlfriend's loyalty. A dude whom we'll call Hunter answered almost immediately, and after a brief back and forth, I gave him her phone number with the agreement that he would send screenshots of the conversation. Honestly, I regretted it as soon as I pressed send on the text with her number, but that was the moment Pandora's box was opened. Guess it wasn't just Pandora's box that was opened. vagines. As anyone following this story probably could have guessed, Hunter, who had a posed as someone who texted her via a wrong number, did not get ignored or shot down. He sent me the screenshots, revealing that she immediately started flirting with this total stranger whom she knew nothing about and didn't even know what he looks like. When he asked her if she was single, she said, "I'm at the tail end of a relationship, but because breaking heart is hard, I have not yet done the deed. It's not a bad relationship by any means. He's an amazing guy, but it's just not the right relationship. On the one hand, it's unfair to him to say, but on the other hand, it feels stupid to leave." She also entertained the idea of meeting up with him that weekend. I mean, honestly, at this point, it's so obvious that she was wanting to end things. Like, you can't be shocked. You really can't be. Here's where I'd like to wonder, though. Who's really the a-hole in this circumstance? Yes, he's deceiving her through this little setup, this sting operation, but she's also dragging him along. Like, she's putting him through so much emotional and mental stress. Like, she's sulking about him not being manly enough for her. Like, what, she's got something to stand on in terms of pride and courage? For full context, she and I had an open relationship with clear boundaries on what was and was not okay. Non-monogamy was actually one of the less problematic aspects of our relationship, and we were both very explicit that we could still cheat, particularly in the realm of emotional infidelity. And so, not only had my trust issues not been assuaged, but Sam immediately took the bait to emotionally cheat on me, hook, line, and sinker. High school Schmidt, folks. When I saw the conversation as it unfolded, I broke down and was completely overwhelmed with hurt, grief, and shock. However, this catharsis somehow gave me a very brief moment of clarity. An eye of the storm, I guess. I knew I needed to break up with her that day to free myself from the pain, or I would end myself before she released me. I called her that evening and told her we should talk about breaking up. And although she started to sob, she immediately was like, "Yes, we should definitely break up. You're a great guy, but we're not compatible. It's not you, it's me, blah, blah, blah." And after a 20-minute conversation, she was ready to never speak to me again. She somehow didn't connect the dots on the timing of the texts from the wrong number and me breaking up with her, and the very next day, I told Hunter to leave her alone and stop texting her. He said he would. He had no interest in her anyway. I spent the next month devastated, trying to pick up the pieces of my shattered heart. We went from trying to stay friends to her becoming extremely distant, to her telling me explicitly that she no longer cared about me and had no desire to ever see or speak to me ever again within the span of 2 months. It was then I finally decided to go no contact. Yeah, here's the thing about love. If you really love someone in a relationship and you end things, but you still manage to be real good friends and there's no issues whatsoever upon future dating, either you didn't really love them in a monogamous way, or you're like a goddamn monk when it comes to your emotional integrity. You're dating someone to be exclusive with them, and then you lose them. You will always be kidding yourself if you don't think you'll ever feel any sort of hurt and pain if you guys aren't being what you were. There's nothing toxic about going no contact with an ex-partner. For a lot of us, I mean, me included, it's honestly better. I mean, you were planning to get married and have kids. Like, how do you just go from that to, "Oh, yeah, we're just good buddies. How you doing, friend?" No. About a month into no contact, I got a text from a random number looking for Sam. After texting back and forth, I learned that it was Hunter's wife and that he was married with 2 children. His wife, whom we'll call Becca, had gone into Hunter's phone and discovered that just days after our breakup, Sam had initiated an intimate relationship with Hunter that had gone on for 2 months. And she found a bunch of numbers of people he had been texting with and was trying to track down Sam to ask questions and make the best decisions for her family. I learned that she had found Sam's number, but Becca's number had already been pre-blocked by Sam as if she knew it was coming. I was completely floored when I learned about how my mistake had gotten so out of hand. So a moment later, I called Sam up and confessed to everything. She was obviously extremely furious and blamed me for everything, rejecting my apologies and telling me that I was the one who put her in the situation. She hung up, and that was the last time I ever spoke to her. By that night, both Sam and Sarah had blocked me on all social media. I also got an angry text from Hunter, which I ignored. "How dare you, OP? You caused me to slip over and accidentally fall on my phone and send all these responses to this stranger who randomly texted me. And then you made me slip and fall on their penis. How dare you make me ruin his marriage? That was you who did that. You made me go bouncy bouncy on his ding-dong. After that drama bomb, I spent the next month just trying to process everything that happened, and I sent her one final letter to her email, apologizing one last time, fully explaining myself, admitting to my poor mental health, and saying a final goodbye. She never responded, and I doubt she even read it. Since then, I've been focusing on myself, healing, and growing as a person. But the story doesn't end there. Shortly after I sent the apology letter, I got a text from a random number that simply said, "Did Sam have herpes?" At that point, I was so over everything that I just ignored it. The next morning, I woke up to a furious text from Hunter accusing me of knowing that Sam had herpes and that I was responsible for him getting a lifelong disease from her. This triggered an emotional response, and against my better judgment, I responded that I had no knowledge of any herpes, and we texted back and forth a bit. Hunter was very forthcoming with me and told me that allegedly Sam had given him herpes, which he presumably gave to Becca. He was trying to figure out if Sam had been sleeping with other guys while she had been sleeping with him, which was a hilarious irony given what happened with me. And he basically asserted that it was my responsibility to contact her and let her know she had herpes so she would not continue spreading it. And he also implied that from what he knew, she very likely had been cheating on me even before she and Hunter started texting. I don't mean to be equally as harsh, but considering the way she spoke and treated you, I'm not surprised. I decided to get a herpes test, but told Hunter to frick off and that my results were none of his business, that it wasn't my responsibility to prevent her future hookups from catching herpes, and that there was no reason for me to talk about or even think about her anymore. And then I blocked him. My results came back clean as a whistle, although I maintain that the general societal herpes stigma is nuts. And finally closed that chapter of my life, which allowed me to truly start the healing process. I began therapy, started journaling and meditating, became sober, got a new amazing job, started dating a really awesome woman, and am moving out on my own for the first time next month. I guess I just felt like sharing all of this because today is a relevant milestone, and I thought it was amusingly dramatic. So anyway, to wrap up this stupidly long story that happened almost a full year ago, I never found out what happened with Hunter, and I don't care. I also recently learned secondhand that Sam is still single, so I guess I wasn't the only barrier to that ideal life. I still plan on making full amends for everything I did to hurt her over the years, which was a lot, all of which I regret, when I reached step 9 of the 12-step program, but I'll cross that bridge when I'm ready. I'm still very traumatized from the emotional abuse, and I feel the effects of that trauma every single day. I'm always trending upward and slowly moving along, and now all I can do is laugh about how stupid and immature a breakup it really was. So to summarize this entire clusterfrick, a crumbling relationship spurs a depressed and alcoholic boyfriend to find internet strangers to flirt with his, at that point, pretty much turning into ex, who then literally cheats on him. He's like a shocked Pikachu face, well, we are, and he decides to dump her, realizing though that he's accidentally caused her to become a homewrecker and destroy the life of a family. Also, herpes. Gotta chuck in a bit of herpes there. Why not? It smacks. There's gotta be STDs at some point. Honestly, if your program tells you to be apologizing to her at some point, no. Screw her. Don't, literally. Again, maybe this is personal bias, but my man, she screwed you over. All the emotional damage she was just throwing at you, and you think she deserves an apology because you were literally having to resort to exposing her in order to get her to be honest with you? But okay, I mean, all the things he was doing at the start, look, I mean, could you say that maybe he was bringing this onto himself? He was pushing her away in a sense with all this, he was behaving in ways that she just didn't find compatible anymore. And you can argue she should have been upfront about it all then, but she kind of was. She did bring up, hey, I'm not really someone who's good at saying the right words to make you feel better. It's just how I'm feeling in this moment is who I am. You need to accept that about me. It's interesting because there's just a lot of little nuances throughout this whole little back and forth of doing terrible things to each other. But at the end of the day, we can all be in comfort knowing that at least this isn't us. We'll just say though, you telling Hunter to leave her alone afterwards, you broke up with her, man. You don't get to choose who goes after her. So yeah, a real big story overall. Let me know down in the comments below, like, any of the moments that really stuck out to you that you found just so stupid, or maybe you've experienced it yourself. I'd love to know what you guys have gone through yourselves in lives. I don't know. I like these stories because it really kind of just shows the worst of what we can become, which is a very nice compliment to the people who go through these events themselves. But hey, that's me. My name's been Jack. Thank you for sticking around and enjoying these stories today. Well, story. And have a good one. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.